You're tuned into the Spot-Up Pod, the official podcast of the Spot-Up Shot newsletter. I'm your host, Paul Garcia. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Spot-Up Pod. So it's been quite a while since I last recorded an episode. The last Spot-Up Pod episode came out on November 17th, so I have 6 games to go through. I hope all of you had a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday, but let's go ahead and jump into these last 6 games for the Spurs. I'm going to do a very quick recap here because it's a lot of information here. All right, so let's go back to Tuesday, November 19th. The Spurs are in the play-in the NBA Cup, should I say, the NBA Cup game against the Oklahoma City Thunder. The Thunder were favored by 10 points in this game, and yet the Spurs come away with a 6-point victory against OKC. So that was one notable win for the Spurs to start off this recap. Then a few days later on Thursday, on November 21st, the Spurs are hosting the Utah Jazz. The Spurs were favored by 3 in this game. They ended up winning by 8, but it took a lot for them to come back. They actually fell down by as many as 20 points, and so they did make the full 20-point comeback, their largest comeback of the season, and they ended up beating the Jazz by 8 points on November 21st. Then on Saturday, November 23rd, the Spurs are hosting the Golden State Warriors in San Antonio. The Warriors were favored by 3.5. Again, it took another comeback for the Spurs. They came back from a 17-point deficit to beat the Warriors by 10 points on this Saturday, on that Saturday evening. And then their fourth game of this recap came on last week. On Tuesday, November 26th, the Spurs are back on the road at Utah playing the Jazz again, where the Spurs are favored by 2.5 against Utah, and they end up winning by 13 points. Then the fifth game this past week took place when the Spurs were back home on the second night of a back-to-back against the Los Angeles Lakers. The Lakers were also on the second night of a back-to-back, and the Spurs on Wednesday, November 27th, they were underdogs by 2 points to the Lakers, and the Lakers basically really just had too much firepower for them. The Spurs really had a difficult time against the Lakers' defense. And so the Lakers ended up winning this game by 18 points. This is one of those deficits the Spurs could not come back from. And then the most recent win for the Spurs, their most recent game, came on Sunday. They were on the road at Sacramento on December 1st. The Kings were favored by 6.5 because they were at home. And no, the Spurs actually made another big comeback. They came back from 17 points against Sacramento, and they ended up winning by 2 points. The Spurs did there in crunch time. They made a few more plays than the Kings did. And so the Spurs, I mean, they really defied Vegas's expectations. Vegas basically said, if we go by over/under, the Spurs are supposed to go 2-4 in these last 6 games, and no, they actually surpassed these expectations with going 5-1. So again, really big wins for the Spurs against Golden State, against OKC, against Sacramento, and then even just getting some of those comebacks, getting that 20-point comeback against a team like Utah. So again, the only loss was to the Lakers in these past 6 games. One notable thing about these last 6 games, as I mentioned, is that the Spurs did come back, from 3 different 15-point deficits. So now they are 3-6 this season, went down by 15 points. And if you just if you're watching the video, you see the graphics there. It's basically been like a very consistent pattern for the Spurs this season, where they're struggling out of the gate in the first quarter. They're a minus 13.1 points per 100 possessions in first quarters. Then they kind of get back a little. They start chipping at the other team's lead. They're a -5 in second quarters, points per 100 possessions, and then they completely take over in the second half. They've become what I call a second half team, where they're still dominating the third quarter. They're winning that quarter by 15.4 points per 100 in the third quarter, and that's kind of been a consistent pattern this season. But now they're coming through in the most critical quarter, which is the fourth quarter. They are now a plus 2.5 points per 100 in fourth quarter. So the Spurs are really a second half team, is what we're seeing through 20 games this season, where they're able to, yes, they fall in these holes, but they're able to come back, and they've shown that. Like I said, they're 3-6 and down 15. I think they're like 5-8 when they're down double digits. So they are showing that that obviously it's not a full 48-minute game, but they're at least playing a 24-minute game, and that's helping them play some winning basketball, as I'm going to get into here through the first 20 games of the season for the Spurs. But that was just a quick recap of how the team has done in their last 6 games since I last recorded an episode of the Spot-Up Pod. Okay, so before I get to the main topic of this episode, and then discussing some players from the past 6 games, I do want to talk about some notable news and notes regarding the Spurs in these past 6 games, basically, or just the last few days, we should say. For one, they're going to get one of their defensive stoppers back. Jeremy Sochan is soon going to make his return to the court. He is listed as probable to play Tuesday at Phoenix in a NBA Cup game. I keep calling them playing games for some reason. In an NBA Cup game. And so Sochan could be back as soon as Tuesday at Phoenix. And so regarding the news about Sochan coming back, I do, if he does come back against Phoenix, I do think that he'll continue to come off the bench. I don't think that the Spurs want to disrupt their starting lineup that they have in place right now with Stephon Castle in Sochan's place, or not in his place, but in the starting lineup, because statistically that has been a really good lineup for the Spurs. And actually, just looking at the overall NBA, this is a very good lineup. So, with Castle in that starting five right now, the Spurs have a net rating of plus 22.1 points per 100 per cleaning the glass. That is in the 88th percentile, a very good number. And then when we just look at lineups that have played over 200 possessions, according to Cleaning the Glass, this is the best lineup in the NBA, according to their data. That starting unit was Castle in there instead of Sochan. When Sochan was in the starting lineup, the Spurs were a minus 9.6 points per 100, 18th percentile. So again, it was a very small sample size, obviously. Who knows what it would turn into by 20 games, but for now, I don't think they want to disrupt that lineup that's really showing, at least statistically and also by the record, the fact that they're a winning ball club right now, that they want to disrupt that. So I do think that should Sochan make his return to the team on Tuesday or at some point this coming week, I do think that he'll end up coming off the bench, similar to what they've done with Devin Vassell, where he's kind of like more so on an injury management kind of plan, where he's on a certain limitation, he can't play in certain back-to-backs, things like that, and so they've had him coming off the bench. So I do see that as a probable role for Sochan early on as he makes his return slowly to back from injury with that thumb injury that kept him out for quite a few weeks here. The Spurs, though, we won't get to see a full team for what the Spurs are going to look like on the court, even if Sochan comes back on Tuesday, because they sustained another injury to one of their core rotation players, and that is Tre Jones. Jones was hit in the left shoulder area by a Sabonis illegal screen in that game against Sacramento on Sunday, and so he left the game. He was listed as I think it was doubtful to return. And so the Spurs did list him as out versus Phoenix on Tuesday with a left shoulder sprain. So it's not a major injury for Jones, but he is going to miss some time here. It looks like after he had just got back and had just been playing in a few games here and there, he too was coming off an ankle, I believe it was an ankle injury after the first game of the season. And so some other notes to note about this coming week is that it's a big week on Tuesday. I do want to note that I'm recording on Monday night. The Spurs, they have a chance to lock up Group B in the NBA Cup, the Emiratis NBA Cup, where if the Spurs defeat Phoenix on Tuesday, they control their own destiny. They advance to the knockout rounds. All they have to do is beat Phoenix. Obviously, that's a tall task to do that. Phoenix is a very good ball club out west, but that's all the Spurs need to do to get into the knockout rounds is defeat Phoenix. Now, should the Spurs fall to Phoenix, there are a bunch of different scenarios where they could still end up getting one of those wild card slots, but it's much more difficult. They need certain things to go in their favor, this and that. So again, they control their own destiny. If they can just get this win on Tuesday at Phoenix, that would give them sole position to take Group B out west, which is what they're in, and move on to the knockout round. So again, that's something to note. And then some other news I missed since I didn't record last week was that Harrison Barnes was named the Western Conference Player of the Week last week for in the NBA, and so that was just something notable that Barnes was named the Western Conference Player of the Week. Not only was he the first Spurs player to win that award for this season, but he was also the only Spurs player to be nominated for that award so far this season. I really thought a few weeks ago when I talked about Wemby's 50-point game that he would have got at least a nomination out west, but he didn't even get a nomination that week. But at least Barnes won the award for as a Spurs player this past week. So those are just some quick news and notes to catch up on what's going on here before that Tuesday game in Phoenix. All right, so our main topic here is to kind of just look at the Spurs through 20 games. Now we have a real sample size here of 20 games. Like I mentioned, Sochan's barely coming back. Tre Jones is going to be out. So we really don't know what this team really is as a full group, but we have a pretty good idea because most of their core rotation players have been in place. I know some players have had to sit out of games due to injuries here and there. So right now the Spurs are playing winning basketball. Like I mentioned earlier, they are 11-9 through their first 20 games, which puts them on pace. If this winning percentage holds, they would basically be looking at a 45-win season, which is a massive improvement for a team that only won 22 games last season. Something that Wemby said is that it's just been 20 games. So again, we don't want to put too much stock into how they're doing right now. There's still a lot of season left to go, 62 games specifically left to play. But right now, through 20 games, the Spurs have done a great job of playing winning basketball. By being a team over 500, they're in the tough Western Conference, which means that you basically have to have that kind of a record, be over 500 to be in that play-in race. And so they are currently in that place. They're actually 10th out west, which puts them in that play-in race right now. Obviously, there's a lot of season left, but again, that's where you have to be if you want to be in those playoffs or play-in race. You need to be probably playing 500 or better basketball. So again, that's what they're doing right now. One thing too to note is that they've built this record with most of these games against the tough Western Conference. The Spurs have played 19 of their 20 games against the West, and they are 10-9 against the West. And again, we do want to note that 4 of those games were against Utah, but they played some other really good teams. OKC, they played Golden State, the Rockets multiple times. So they played a bunch of different teams here. The Lakers they've played. So they've got some being 10-9 against the West is something very notable, considering that they haven't had their full rotation yet in a single game this season, and that means that they still have a big chunk of their season where they're going to play the Eastern Conference teams. Now I know they play most of the East teams only twice, but the East is going to be those games where the Spurs need to really try to win those games because only 6 of 15 teams out East have records above 500 or above, whereas in the West 10 of 15 teams have records at 500 or above. So again, that's just something notable that the Spurs' schedule, they've endured this and stayed playing winning basketball so far through the first 20 games of the season. Continuing with the conversation of how the Spurs are doing through their first 20 games, I want to first begin with their just where they're at statistically on both ends of the floor. I'm going to basically mainly feature here the top 10 areas and on both the defense and offense. I'm going to begin with defense first because that is more so the Spurs' strength as a team. Is they're a better defensive ball club than offensive ball club, but they have made some improvements offensively since I last did one of these little recaps here of how they've been doing. So defensively, they have slipped a bit. They're now 13th overall. Allowing 112.2 points per 100 possessions. So let's first begin with the good stuff for them on defense. Their top 10 ratings. They are 7th in opponent effective field goal percentage. So again, this is taking into effect the 2 plus the 3 and kind of mixing it together in a percentage. And so they're doing a good job here of opponents are struggling to shoot against them in this area. The fact that they're 7th here, the Spurs, they're doing a great job of not putting the opponent on the free throw line. They're actually 2nd in opponent free throw rate. They're 3rd in blocks, and obviously, if you have Victor Wembanyama, who is leading the league currently in blocks with I think 3.5, that's going to help you be there. And so they're 3rd currently in the league in blocks. They're 10th in defensive rebounds. They're 8th in opponent points per game. 8th also in opponent dunk layup accuracy, so that closest area to the basket. The Spurs are obviously deterring a lot of shots by having Wemby there, and just as a team, they're corralling around that paint area, and so they're 8th there, making it very difficult to finish against the Spurs near the closest area to the rim. And then they're also 8th in opponent 3-point accuracy, so they're doing a better job of that was one of their issues after like the first 10 games, was that opponents were shooting really well against them. Part of it is the opponents that they're playing, but then also part of it is that they are contesting a lot more shots. They're rotating a lot better, especially when they can get into the half court and really make it a very difficult to score against their defense. And then, speaking of the half court, according to Cleaning the Glass, the Spurs have the 7th best half court defense. So again, those are some of the areas where the Spurs are really standing out top 10 on the defensive end. The areas where they're bottom 10, there's not too many concerning areas here. The opponent offensive rebound percentage is a little concerning. The Spurs are 22nd here, so we do see that once Wemby kind of goes to the bench, or maybe if he's stretched out guarding a perimeter player on a defensive play, they're really the opponents have a better chance of getting offensive boards. And we did see in that most recent win against the Kings that acting head coach Mitch Johnson actually kind of messed with the rotation in the backup center role a little bit, where he actually had Charles Bassey come in and get some minutes instead of Zach Collins in the first half. Now Bassey didn't play very well. He actually got four fouls in like 6 minutes or something like that. But then Zach did finish out the second half. But again, they're showing that signs of like they're not, some games they go to Mamu with the backup center. Sometimes they go to Bassey. They're not. So it looks rotation wise like they're not so sold on Zach Collins as the backup center there, and so that's why you do see some movement there in the rotation. Now, because they're off, they do allow a big percentage of offensive rebounds to the opponent. This does put them 29th in opponent second chance points, so that's obviously very concerning. Again, those boards and those second chances. And then this one's not too concerning, but in terms of opponent mid range accuracy, teams the Spurs' defense is 24th here. And again, it's not you'd rather have opponents taking more mid rangers against your defense, and part of that is that's like the only shot the Spurs are giving up because they have Wemby there near the paint. They have a lot of good rotation players defensively out on the wings and on the perimeter, like Stephon Castle, Julian Champagnie, et cetera. So Harrison Barnes. So that's, again, the defense has been one of the strengths for this team, and obviously getting Sochan back is going to help that even more. Maybe get them back into the top 10, having one of their better versatile defenders who can play inside and outside coming back to the team. All right, so now the next area I want to focus on is offense. And the Spurs, I will, got to give them some credit. They've made some improvements here because that early on after like the first 10 games, they were like a bottom 10 team offensively. They were really struggling to score the ball, and so they made some improvements. They have more strengths now as I review how they've done through 20 games, should I say? So offensively, they are 19th, scoring 112.2 points per 100. So again, no longer a bottom 10 offense anymore. Just slightly below league average. Here's where they're top 10. They are back to being number one in assist percentage. So when they assist a basket, are they? I mean, when they make a field goal, is there an assist off of that? And yes, it's showing that even with the inclusion of a more traditional point guard like Chris Paul with Stephon Castle out there, with Tre Jones, Blake Wesley, all those different guards, the Spurs are still getting really good ball movement, and so they are first again in assist percentage, which is where they were last year to finish the season. They are also sixth in 3-point attempts. So their volume is really high in the league, sixth there, and that's good because, like I said, they've been a more successful team this year when they do win the 3-point line, and by doing that, they are able to win that battle. Now I'll dive into those numbers a little bit more. They are seventh in dunk layup accuracy. So again, that closest area to the rim. Part of this is Wemby when he's actually able to take shots near that area. He's very effective, and so are some of the Spurs players there. And so they are seventh there. They don't take a lot of attempts there. That's one thing, is their volume's not very high because they're taking more threes now. But at least when they get to that closest area of the rim, they are seventh there in accuracy and finishing. And then they're 10th in 3-point make. So obviously they're taking a lot of threes, but they're also making a lot of threes, which is going to help them, win that 3-point battle, which is critical in today's, NBA with a lot of different teams shooting threes. So that's one thing. Those are some of the positives for them offensively. On the bottom 10 areas, some of the concerning areas offensively is that they're still playing more so at a slower pace than last year. They're 24th in a fast break point, so they're not really getting out on the break as much. They play more so slower type of tempo, which allows the opponent's defense to get set against them and things like that. And that was something that Harrison Barnes mentioned in the loss to the Lakers, was that the Spurs were kind of like walking the ball up too much, and it was allowing the Lakers to get set in that half court defense and really get their strategies going on what they wanted to do to try to stop the Spurs offensively, and that was one of the key reasons why they lost that game. So that's something notable, is that they're 24th in fast break points. These numbers aren't too notable right here. So they're 28th in floater attempts and 24th in floater accuracy. But again, the floater is not an efficient shot, so that's okay that the Spurs aren't very efficient there, because that's not a good shot you want to be taking. And then it's good that they're not taking a lot of shots from there. The fact that they're 28th in attempts. Because they're taking so many threes though on offense, that is having an effect on their scoring in the paint. They're 23rd now in points in the paint in terms of scoring per game. So that's one thing to watch, is that yes, they're obviously dominating that 3-point line, or not dominating, but doing really well there. But it's the effect is that it is limiting their attempts there at the paint when they're taking a lot more of their shots from the 3-point line. And then again, not too much of a concerning number is that their mid-range accuracy is 25th right now. And again, you don't really want to take a lot of mid-range jumpers unless it's players like Devin Vassell or Chris Paul taking mid-rangers. All right, so the last part of this discussion about the first 20 games for the Spurs, let's just kind of review now where they are in the math game. So from twos, which is mid-range and the paint, the Spurs are getting outscored here by 140 total points. And so then when we go to the threes, the Spurs are outscoring their opponents by 84 points. When we go to the free throw line, the Spurs are outscoring their opponents by 63 points, which means that overall the Spurs through 20 games are a +7 in total points. So they're a +7. So they are a positive team here, winning that 3-point battle and the free throw battle while losing the 2-point battle. And when we talk about that 2-point battle, I just kind of want to dive in here a little bit more, like, what are the numbers say here? And so in terms of points in the paint, they are getting outscored by 3.5 points per game, which isn't too much, in the paint. The dunk layup range isn't too concerning. They're only getting outscored by 0.8 points per game from there. So they're almost like even there, it's not too concerning. That floater range, again, I think that, defensively they would rather have their opponents shooting from that range. And then of course, offensively, they don't want to be taking that shot as well. So they're a -2.8 points per game there. And then the mid range is probably the biggest area, but again, you'd rather give that up if you're on defense and you don't really want to take that shot too much on offense. So they're a -3.6 points per game there from the mid range. So that's just kind of looking at the math game through 20 games now. Let's keep going. All right, so now for this next part of the discussion, I want to talk about Wemby, how he's doing, because what I've done is I've kind of looked at the players who kind of stood out in the last 6 games. Now, I do want to note that Wemby only played in 4 of these last 6 games after he was dealing with an injury. So I'm gonna basically talk about his season numbers, kind of what's popping out and kind of where his numbers are. So far through I think it's like 17 games or 16 games played, he's scoring 24 points per game for the team. He did have 28. He was averaging in his last six. He's taking 18 shots a game, making 48% of them. So his accuracy has gone up as the season's progressed. His 3-point volume is still high at 9.2 3-point attempts. He's making 35% of his threes. In those last six games, he was taking 11.3 3-point attempts, so his volume's gone up even more. And then free throws, he's getting 3.6 free throw attempts so far this season, making about 86% of them. He's averaging a double-double with 10.2 rebounds, 3.6 assists to 3.6 turnovers, 1.3 steals, and 3.5 blocks. Like I mentioned, that is leading the league. Just one thing we've noted is that, as he's increased his 3-point volume and gotten better in terms of accuracy, we do see that teams have definitely taken away a lot of his wide open threes. Only 34% of Wemby's threes are being attempted wide open, and there's a reason for that. When he gets a wide open three, he's making 41% of them now, which is above league average compared to last season. So again, that's why we do see now that teams are more so closing out on him, playing differently, a little bit more concerned about his 3-point attempts, which is giving him more chances to operate inside, either through the post or getting putting the ball on the floor and driving. And we have seen that in some of these last few games for him. His pull-up three is actually, also getting a little bit better here. His pull-up three accuracy is now up to 34%, which is almost close to where his catch and shoot three is, which is at 35%. In crunch time, he's been one of the go-to players for the Spurs. He's making 55% of his shots in crunch time, 11 rebounds, 3 blocks, and then 4 assists to 3 turnovers in crunch time. And then in terms of where he stands out, when we look at his per 36 numbers defensively compared to his teammates, he stands out at deflections, steals, contested shots, blocks, defensive rebounds. I mean, basically everything defensively. And then just some of the numbers that I caught from Synergy here defensively just kind of tells more of his story, is that when Wemby guards the pick and roll ball handler, usually like the guard when he has to make a switch, the opponents are only scoring 0.92 points per possession, which is a good number. It's below 1. When he guards the roll man in 10 possessions, opponents haven't scored on him. They're averaging 0.0 points per possession. I do want to note that it's only been 10 possessions. And then when he has to guard an ISO, when he gets isolated defensively, according to Synergy, he's only opponents are only scoring 0.87 points per possession. So again, Victor's doing a great job here across the board on different metrics, especially defensively, but then offensively, he's added a little bit more variety to his game, not just solely having to rely on the 3-point line. Obviously that helps him out, but also being able to work inside now a little bit more, especially that game against Sacramento was a perfect example where, early on, yes, he was going to his 3-point shots, some of his mid-rangers, but then in the fourth quarter, the Spurs were specifically running a lot of pick and roll opportunities for him to get switched onto a Sacramento guard. And then he could either, post up that player and drive on him, or he could kick out to a teammate if the Kings try to send a double team toward Victor. Another player who had a standout last 6 games was Harrison Barnes. Like I mentioned, he won the Western Conference Player of the Week last week. So for the season, he's averaging 11.6 points. In these last 6 games, he's been averaging 17 points. His season numbers, he's taken 7 shots a game, very low volume, 51% accuracy though, so very efficient shooter. He only takes 3.3 3-point attempts, but he's making 46% of them. Again, very efficient shooter on threes. And then he's pretty aggressive in terms of getting to the foul line. 3.1 free throw attempts, making 80% of his foul shots. He averages 4.9 rebounds, 1.7 assists, and to 0.8 turnovers, 0.3 steals, and 0.2 blocks. Then just some of the things I looked at in terms of his shot profile. Like I mentioned, across different kind of areas from three, whether it's the above the break three, whether it's catch and shoot, wide open threes, corner threes, he's efficient on all those different kind of shots. He's above league average compared to last season. And then one thing we do notice is that he and Julian Champagnie, who I'm going to talk about a little bit later, they are two of the Spurs' key corner shooters, where they take over 20% of their threes from the corners. Those two players, and they're both very efficient shooters there. Barnes is actually making 52% of his threes there in the corner. And then just when I looked at his overall defensive numbers compared to some of his teammates, he doesn't foul much. When we look at some of the Synergy numbers in terms of pick and roll ball handler defense, he's allowing 0.95 points per possession, good number. ISO defense, 0.82 points per possession. And then on offense, when he's the roll man on offense, he's scoring 1 points per possession. And then one thing you just want to note about him compared to the other starters, that he has the lowest usage percentage at 14%. So again, he doesn't take a lot of possessions. He's very deliberate in terms of if he's going to drive, he's going to drive. If he's going to move the ball, he makes very quick decisions. And you see that there in that low usage percentage number, 14%. But the fact that he was able to average 17 points on a very low usage, it just shows how efficient of a player Barnes is. And of course, he's been part of the Spurs' games in most of their crunch time games, and he's been there to kind of help lead the team, especially in some of those fourth quarters. The next player who had a pretty good last 6 games was the Rook, Stephon Castle. So for the season, Castle's averaging about 11 points per game, 11.3 points per game. But in the last 6 games, he was averaging 14.7 points per game, so almost 15 points a night. Shooting wise, obviously, it's that part of his game is still coming along. And like I've mentioned before, he kind of, since it's his rookie season, he kind of has a blank slate to kind of figure it out. To kind of take some risk here. Take some different kind of shots, figure out what kind of shot profile he wants to have, and then of course next season and then the years following will be where he has to kind of clean some of those areas up. So he is taking 10 shots a game, making just 39% of them. From three, he's taking 4.2 threes per game, making just 29% of them. And then from the free throw line, he does get to the free throw line for a rookie at 3 free throw attempts per game, making 71% of them. And on his drives, he really is able to get to the line. He's one of the players on the Spurs' team who sticks out there. As far as some of his base numbers, 2.6 rebounds, 3.7 assists to 1.8 turnovers, 0.8 steals, and 0.5 blocks. And then for a rook, who's a very physical guard, really plays and has to guard all sorts of different players, especially the opponent's best players a lot of nights. He's only averaging 1.7 fouls, so that's actually pretty notable for him that he's not getting himself into too much foul trouble. And then we do see that on his threes that teams are leaving him wide open. 69% of his threes are being attempted wide open. He's making 31% of his threes. But like I said, even though he's struggling overall in his accuracy, he's a very confident player. That doesn't deter him from not shooting. There's been some key games and clutch moments where Castle's actually taken some big threes, and it's because he moves on very quickly from plays. He doesn't really think too much about did I miss that shot or something happened there. I made a mistake. I threw a bad pass. He moves on immediately to the next player, or he tries to make up for it on a defensive player on the other end. That's just something that you see that's kind of rare for a 19-year-old rookie or 20-year-old rookie that Castle is. The fact that he doesn't really get too bothered by some mistakes or missed shots. He really just stays in the game and makes the next play, and that's something that the coaching staff has talked about him. That some of the other veteran players have mentioned about Castle. And then just something you see in here in the crunch time numbers is that he's been one of the go-to players for the Spurs for being just a rookie. He's actually leading. He's the leading shot maker on the team right now in crunch time. He's also tied for the most free throw makes in crunch time. And then he's been very solid defensively. And then we do see that with him as a starter in the starting unit, he has a 21% usage rate, which is right behind Wemby. So basically, it's Wemby first in usage on the team, and then Castle. So again, he's getting more opportunity as a starter to kind of take some shots, move the ball to his teammates. Really try to get to the free throw line. Those kind of situations he's being put in, and the teams and the Spurs are allowing him to kind of again figure out what kind of rookie is he going to be at the NBA level. So Castle had a pretty good last 6 games. All right, and then the last player who's had a pretty good 6 games was Julian Champagnie. He's for the season, he's averaging 12 points a night, but in these last 6 games, he's averaging almost 15 points, 14 and a half points. 9.4 for his season numbers, 9.4 field goal attempts, making 44% of his shots, 6.8 3-point attempts. So behind Wemby, he's probably the second highest volume shooter on the team. From 3, making 36% of his threes. Doesn't get to the foul line too much. 1.5 free throw attempts, 90% free throw accuracy. Although we have seen a pattern the last few games where almost like it seems like every game he's getting fouled on a 3-point attempt. Teams are fouling him on those shots because of how quickly he fires that 3 away. So that's something notable that he's been drawing fouls on his threes. 5.3 rebounds. So pretty good rebounding numbers there. 1.7 assists to 1.1 turnovers, 1 steal, and then 0.7 blocks and 1.4 fouls. Again, similar to Castle, Champagnie gets pretty tough defensive matchups every night, and so he's actually doing a good job of not getting himself in foul trouble. And then we also see too that he's been he's not too shy about being in that starting lineup. That if there's a shot for him, he's going to take it. And so we do see that there with his 15.9% usage rate amongst the starters. He's third there behind Wemby, Castle, and then it's Champagnie in usage. Like I mentioned about Barnes, Castle was very critical to this team in terms of being one of the key corner shooters, where over 20% of his threes come from the corners. He's making 38% of his corner threes, and similar to Wemby, the defenses do not leave Castle open from 3. Only 39% of his threes are left wide open. And the reason for that is because if you leave him wide open, he's going to make his shot 40% of the time his threes. So again, that's a good number there on wide open threes. And then just defensively, where he stands out compared to his teammates, he stands out in deflections, contested shots, blocks, fouls, and defensive rebounds. And then just some numbers from Synergy defensively is that he's holding pick and roll ball handlers to 0.91 points per possession on defense, and then in isolation situations he's holding opponents to 0.88 points per possession. So again, part of that Spurs defense in terms of getting improving this so far this season through 20 games is the fact they have two good wing defenders out there on the starting lineup with Castle and with Champagnie out there who are both playing a very good sound defense out there for the team. All right, so that kind of wraps up this episode. We're getting here close to the end. As far as when the next episode will be back, I'm back. No, now that Thanksgiving break is over, I'm going to be back to my weekly recording. So my next episode will come out next Monday. I'll record. So the Spurs will have played 4 games between that time. So they're going to play that playing game on Tuesday at Phoenix. They're going to play on Thursday back home in San Antonio against Chicago for the first time in their second Eastern Conference team of the season to play. Then on Friday they have a second half of back-to-back. They're hosting the Kings once more, the third time they've seen Sacramento. And then on Sunday, they're going to host the New Orleans Pelicans for the first time this season. Another Western Conference team, but they've been dealing with a lot of injuries, so they're not playing obviously up to the expectations that were set out for them early on the season. So if I have to make a prediction, I was going to say 2-2. Maybe they lose that Phoenix game and that Sacramento game because the Sacramento game's on the second out of back-to-back. But they have been defying expectations, the Spurs. They've been playing better basketball than maybe what it would say on paper, what Vegas would say. So I'm going to go 3-1, and I'm going to say that the only loss happens either the game at Phoenix on Tuesday or on Friday against Sacramento. And I think right now I'm going to lean more so the Phoenix game. So again, we'll see what happens for the Spurs. They're playing better basketball, like I mentioned, through 20 games, and now they're going to get Sochan back, and so that'll be some configuration there of how does Sochan fit into this team? Is he going to start? Is he going to come off the bench? And then the fact that defensively he's going to bring a lot to the team. He was playing very well offensively in terms of rolling, getting cuts to the basket, but obviously teams were still leaving him open from 3 before he got injured. So again, there's a lot of different kind of questions coming in, but the Spurs are getting closer to getting their full team available right before the winter holidays approach. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of the Spotted Pod. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a rating on your favorite podcast apps and our YouTube channel. The Spotted Pod is recorded and produced by Paul Garcia. The music for this episode was written by Vincent Garcia and Paul Garcia. Thank you for listening and have a great day.